Now let's just welcome Christoph Brunner and Jonas Fritsch, and they're giving a talk about Beyond the Network, Experiential Fields and Urban Media Ecologies.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you, Jens, for introducing us. Indeed, the Europeans getting a bit tired and still have to talk. My name is Christoph Brunner. I am, just because I think it helped me a bit when people said this, I'm in between, let's say, media, art, and philosophy. And Jonas and I, we've been collaborating for quite a while now.
And my name is Jonas Fritsch. I come from Aarhus in Denmark, and I work within the field of interaction design and design philosophy, design theory. So we come from different trajectories, and that's what we try to bring something, that transdisciplinary that we've been talking about, the interdisciplinarity is something that we try to actually practice.
We're just so bored by our own communities. No. So just a bit of context before we go into the real topic. So this project is part of a continued collaboration in which we attempt to inhabit a specific space of experimentation between media theory and interaction design to develop new strategies for what we call research creation or research through design. To this work, we want to grasp and explore the experiential effects and complexity of, amongst other things, the distribution of urban interactive technologies. We propose a rethinking of what we usually account for as experience in relation to media, shifting the idea of networks to fields of experience and media ecologies.
Yeah, and we should probably also mention that even though it's a bit late, this is a pretty conceptual presentation. We've been trying to tackle this via a rethinking of a philosophical basis. So we'll be doing that, and then we'll also come back to a couple of examples and talk about that through that. So we start in a book, a recent book by Adrian Mackenzie, where he presents a critique of a network-centric analysis. The book's called Wirelessness, and it's a network-centric analysis of the relational complexity and experiential impact of the distribution of wireless technologies. In this, he bases his critique on a reading of William James's Radical Empiricism. And for James, it's important that relations are not understood as mere connections. In fact, and I quote, he writes that the relations that connect experiences must themselves be experienced relations, and any kind of relation of experience must be accounted as real as anything else in the system. So according to James, relations have the same ontological and epistemological status as particulars, where a particular could be different kinds of media, bodies, or thoughts. So Mackenzie, he builds on his understanding, James's understanding of experience, and explicitly positions his undertaking in contrast to network theories focused on relations as these mere connections. And this is a quote by Mackenzie. After a decade of heavily network-centric social, cultural, organizational, and mathematical network theory, there are reasons to begin to approach networks a little more diffidently. While it exhorts attention to relations, network theorizing can deanimate relations in favor of a purified form of network stasis, end quote. So, with the term fields of experience, we attempt to follow this path opened by Mackenzie towards an actual conceptualization of the experiential changes and sense modulations effectuated by interactive media environments. This, to us, necessitates a shift away from an entity-based logic of networks where things, objects, or even movements are interrelated and often reduced to fixable substances. Instead, experiential fields address experience as an ecological and relational process, focusing on the conditions of emergence of urban interactive environments. So in this short presentation, we want to bring to life this conceptual shift through an analysis of artist Rafael Lozano Hemmer's installation Frequency and Volume, and a design project we did in Aarhus called Ecomaten. It's an interactive listening machine developed at Aarhus University. And for us, either work constitutes a media ecology activating an experiential field which modulates the potential for action in public space through an effectively engaging mobilization via interactive means. So there you have it.
So I talk now about urban media ecologies, not that urban in the case of Rafael Lozano Hemmer. It's just interesting, we're showing a work of his from 2003, quite a while ago, because We've been working on another piece by him called Voz Alta from 2008. So we wanted to have a kind of fresh view on another work. But in terms of Antoine's work, it's very interesting to see also other works of Raphael Lozano-Hammer, who has excessively worked with light in public space on a very grandesque scale. So in 2003, artist Raphael Lozano-Hammer staged an interactive artwork involving radio frequencies, movement tracking, visitors, and their bodies moving in space. Frequency and volume is part of Lozano-Hammer's relational architecture series. Projecting the silhouettes of their bodies being tracked by the system onto a white wall in a gallery space, participants can tune into different radio frequencies, which then are transmitted and amplified into the space. The system captures frequencies which are not only used by public radio, but also police, ambulance, taxi, and truck drivers. Once a body's shadow has been tracked, a signal is attached to it and modulates according to its movement. Lozano-Hammer describes how frequency and volume problematizes the struggle over access to public material and immaterial spheres. The work was developed as a response to the Mexican government's restrictive administration of radio frequencies, preventing indigenous pirate radios as means of empowerment and political organization. Which is quite interesting because it doesn't come through in the work itself. It's not staged as a kind of label to it, but it's kind of the background noise that goes through and is bodily engaged in. Bearing the idea of pirate radio in mind, one can see how Matthew Fuller's seminal treatment of pirate radio as media ecology in his book Media Ecologies, and Anthony Dunn's development of the idea of Hertzian space come together in frequency and volume. Fuller's account of pirate radio as a media ecology is not concerned with the mere interrelation of humans, technologies, and urban geography, but rather with the blurring of form and content in these ecologies. By exposing sound's modulatory force through frequencies and across technologies, bodies, and geographies, Fuller provides an outline of media ecologies which differs from a more rigid conception of media networks. The technological assemblage of an electromagnetic field is amplified, and the motion tracking of bodies has to be considered in its own operational level, asking what it does. So this kind of question of how, which is also very important to William James. So difference between what and how. As relational operators, these technological devices insert themselves into the field of experience of electromagnetic potential by tweaking such potentials into actual perceptual events through the movement of bodies. The experiential field character of such urban media ecologies enables a thinking of relations as field effects, shaping immediate experience. In turn, each experience relation feeds back into the field's potential. Each individual participant entering the installation immediately constitutes a change of state or phase, causing differential perceptual events with particular effects. Through the media ecological blurring of form and content, the work is less based on stimulus and response or a straightforward communication, but rather provides a field of parallel embodied interaction in time and space and experiential modulation through movement. From this point of view, frequency and volume functions as a proposition for bodies to engage with an incorporeal electromagnetic field, making it corporeally felt by defining what actually becomes felt. Ecologically, what comes together mutually is the interplay of relations as tendencies for emergence acting upon each other. The relational thinking of experience in the making leads us to propose not only a different conceptualization of media as entities, but also a different mode of experimentation with them. Media, in this sense, are not just ecological operators, but also in their very nature differential. And Andrew Murphy writes about that, quote, "Differential media do not just enhance connections, but draw our attention to the difference, to difference as intensity, to movement, to sensation, to ongoing affects," unquote. The difference of networks and ecology resides in differential media's foregrounding of intensity, movement, sensation, and affect as excessive and incorporeal forces in experience. In other words, they are the fielding of the field of experience. Emphasizing the differential processes of media in relation to shifting fields of experience leads us to conceive of any media-related event as a nexus of movements, sensations, and their tendencies, at the same time effectively potentializing and effectively becoming.
So Andrew Murphy, he also points out that the general critique of networks is based on a binary separating structure from emergence. So according to Murphy, structure and emergence actually feed from the same immediate field of relations or immediate field of experience. Immediation as a concept then allows for a grasping of fields of experience in the immediacy and materiality of its very operation through distributions of affective forces. The main question considers the operations at stake, enabling embodied perceptual experience arising not as an act of mediation, but as immediately experienced compositions of space-time for experimentation through perception, orchestrated by interactive means. So we'll try to develop that through this example, which is our Ecomate, an interactive listening machine that was developed at the Center for Digital Urban Living, and is now being redeveloped and continuously developed in another center called Participatory IT. We built it in 2012, and it actually functions as a physical and auditory interface to the 18th century city of Aarhus in Denmark. And by interacting with this machine, you can listen to echoes from the past relating to different kinds of buildings, locations, and events at the large square or Stortorv in the city. And these echoes have supposedly been captured by the machine. They are site-specific stories embedded in a general soundscape, and they're presented in a dramatized form as small radio plays. So if you want to explore these echoes, you need to physically turn and directly position the machine where the echoes relate to. So if there's an echo from the church, when you position the machine towards the church, you get the sound of the church in the 18th century. But it's also echoes that are related to buildings that are not there anymore. For instance, the city well. So if you position the machine where the city well was, you will get the sound of the city well and a small dramatized narrative there. So this way you can gain access to the sounds of everyday life as it might have occurred in the 18th century at this particular location in the city. So we think that Ecomaten is an example of an interaction design that questions conceptions of anytime, anywhere ideals of seamless interaction with ubiquitous and disappearing digital infrastructures. It's a pretty big machine, as you can see. It demands a lot of attention, and it also demands a considerable amount of physical effort from the people who actually want to interact with it. You really need to really push the machine around, and you also need to negotiate with other people if you want to push it in which direction and stuff like that. So this form of tactile engagement immediately modulates the reception of the soundscape and feeds into its reception. Also, we see from observations when we had the machine down there that people behave very differently. Some will turn the machine around very quickly. Some will touch the machine and listen without touch without listening at all. Some will continuously hold on to the machine while listening attentively. Sometimes people will explore the functionality of the machine without actually listening to the echoes, as I said. So this is just one example of how the experiential field offered by the installation plays out very differently through people's courses of interaction. And a lot of people would also listen and look in the completely opposite direction of where the machine was pointing, which is also interesting. So Ecomaten is a machine that activates a range of sensations, the tactile, physical, the auditory, the visual, all modulating this experiential field immediately and effectively engaging the people interacting with the machine. People have commented that by listening to the soundscape, images of how the city might have looked like in the 18th century also emerged. This kind of synesthetic functioning facilitated by the setup relates not least to the fact that Ecomaten is placed in the city. And this might seem banal, but situating the reception of the content in the place in which the events might have taken place not only adds to the atmosphere of the reception of the content, it also plays it very palpably activates people's ideas about how the city might have looked, smelled, and sounded in the past. All of this is immediately experienced as part of the interaction with the machine. So Ecomaten is not mediating the reception of a content, but rather the whole course of interaction activates a rich field of experience that might actualize in a variety of ways. For us, this concept of immediation underlines this co-emergence of media technologies, engaging bodies, and urban environments forming conditions for experiential encounters. Ecomaten is not primarily concerned with connecting people to the past. Instead, it attempts to reactivate past events through people's interaction. So this is a very real way of bringing stories to life. And this form of reactivation of the past events also tends toward future discussions of how Stortorv should function as a public space, how different kinds of interactive technologies might function in this particular kind of urban context. So it's a material manifestation of a whole range of more subtle changes of the way digital and interactive technologies and media ecologies are reconfiguring the cityscape and modulating our perception of urban space.
So just a quick conclusion. Investigating relations between media and the urban along the constitutive lines of experiential fields allows us to reconsider what we usually separate into discrete entities such as the body, the urban, or the political. Shifting the focus on media in urban contexts from an infrastructural or informational discourse toward urban media ecologies as processes of immediation opens new potentials for considering mediatic encounters and the situations they facilitate in experiential terms beyond the network. In frequency and volume, and the moving body modulates frequencies. Their amplification and expression passes as directly felt intensities where neither technology, the body, or the space could individually account for what constitutes this experiential media ecology. Ecomaden creates the conditions of emergence for the immediate coming together and eventful activation of a range of processes, serious and relational events through the interaction, and can be seen as a technology of emergent experience. Politically, we are interested in experimenting with such technologies of emergence through media ecological and immediating propositions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the chance to be here and to present. I'm also a practicing architect right now at Zigger-Sneed Architects in Baltimore. So I'll just get started. It is no surprise that data is the primary medium for exchange in contemporary Western society. Both people and things can be rendered as data that is communicated and transported across vast distances. This transmutation of people and things is at once anonymous and highly specific. A string of numerical characters uniquely identifies an actual physical object, inanimate or not, regardless of size, materiality, or character. This abstraction creates a disconnect between the direct experience of the attributes of a thing and its identifier. This disconnect results in a kind of anonymity. Interestingly, because of the ubiquitous nature of data, we have internalized this condition so that it seems natural to us that a human being or a pack of Swiss rolls can both be described similarly through the universal language of numbers. A pivotal moment in the integration of data with consumer products was the introduction of the UPC in a Marsh's supermarket in Troy, Ohio in 1972. The UPC allowed for the tracking of commodities through space and time within the supply chain by giving products an electronic identity. This identification enables increased accuracy in inventory, improved market analysis, and quicker movement of products to and off the shelf. The tracking of products both satisfies and increases the desires of consumers by ensuring that the right products are there at the right times. The UPC identifies each object as a unique type, a can of Coke, for example, but it cannot indicate what specific can of Coke it is. The proliferation of the use of RFIDs will further expand a culture of identifying and tracking objects. Each RFID carries a unique 96-bit identifier called the Electronic Product Code, or EPC, that can be attached to each product. RFIDs offer incredible advantages in increasing the efficiency of the supply chain and strengthening customer relationship management. With the increasing integration of information, many objects today may be identified as a new class of objects called SPIMEs, and here I'm referencing Bruce Sterling, which are physical objects regarded as material instantiations of an immaterial system. The use of UPC, EPC, and RFIDs creates a single global network, the Internet of Things. This is a radical redefinition of our relationship with objects. By uniquely identifying and inventorying products, we can track them through time and space at will. Individuals are increasingly known by the assemblage of information existing about them in virtual spaces. In fact, the physical and virtual are so intertwined as to be rendered inseparable. In this context, an individual is perhaps best understood as a spatially extended cyborg. And here I'm referencing Bill Mitchell, which is inhabiting a hybrid body composed of bits and atoms with a reach that greatly exceeds the physical limitations of the corporeal body. Because of the immaterial nature of data, however, our usual faculties of sensate perception are inadequate for apprehending this reality. Data is not just a medium for exchange. More specifically, it's a medium for control. In our contemporary control society, first identified by William Burroughs and elaborated by Deleuze, The business is the dominant institution of power, and corporations use electronic data to instrumentalize consumers. Acting as an elaborate apparatus, big box retailers capitalize on the data portions of the body by desubjectifying an individual in order to reconstruct him or her as a member of a consumer subject. So rendered as bits of data, individuals become individuals that can be aggregated into samples and markets. So consumers are given unique identifiers and tracked just as carefully as the commodities they buy. Marketing then is an instrument for social control, as Deleuze says, designed to specifically target these consumer subjects and spur on consumption. Marketing strategies are joined with consumer data in the field of predictive analytics, in which data is collected and analyzed to gain insights into the identities of consumers that allow businesses to market their products more effectively. The interactions of people and objects in retail transactions are increasingly facilitated by data through online shopping, loyalty cards, and credit cards. To complete a transaction, relationships are established between physically remote institutions, such as card networks, card issuers, merchant acquirers, product manufacturers, data mining companies, and corporate headquarters. The seamless, opaque integration of the transfer of data into the ritual of the transaction is necessary for its full-scale deployment into ubiquity. The use of credit cards has dramatically increased over the past 10 years, with over 26.5 billion credit card transactions completed in the United States in 2010. Unlike transactions involving a paper currency, anonymity is impossible, as each swipe of the credit card is tied to a specific consumer subject. Since they are linked to specific individuals, the particulars of those transactions, the time of day, the frequency, the types of items, the locations where they're purchased, all of this achieves greater significance. By looking at transactions completed by individuals over time, data mining companies can identify important patterns and preferences. However, because the tracking is done through immaterial data transfers, we are often unaware that our purchases betray our locations, movements, habits, and preferences. Although the exchange of data is necessary to facilitate transactions between products and people, this exchange still implicates physical objects that have a material presence. The digital and the physical are inextricably linked within space, and the digital lands in the physical as cited materialities. And here I'm referencing Saskia Sassen. So point-of-sale terminals, credit cards, cable and fiber optics communications, and server racks are localized entities that compose a microenvironment with global span through their integration with data. The site of materiality is an entity, then, where the corporeal body interfaces with the digital in an intimate, embodied experience. The integration of immaterial data with physical space, material objects, and people creates an incredibly dynamic spatial configuration, and unbounded by physical limitations and in constant evolution. This cyborg geography is formally indefinite and temporally unstable, transcending natural and artificial boundaries as it is integral with the global economy. Feedback loops implicate the digital and the physical in such a way that they are mutually constitutive, while the same societal forces are shaping both networked and physical spaces. As Mark Wigley identifies, architects have been talking about the impact of data on the traditional city since Melvin Weber and Marshall McLuhan in the 1960s. The resulting discussion of the death of the city and the loss of place tinged by nostalgia is not particularly productive. Instead, Guy Debord suggests urbanism as a force that first built the city and then subsequently unbuilt the city. So according to Debord, quote, urbanism is capitalism's seizure of the natural and human environment, developing logically into absolute domination. Capitalism can and must now remake the totality of space into its own setting. So this, end quote, this remaking of space, regulated by the imperatives of consumption, has led to the dissolution of traditional cities. In a continuation of urban processes in a control society, then, we see new types of spatializations of power undertaken by businesses. These material and immaterial compositions constitute an advanced form of urbanism that transcends the spatial limits of the city. In discussing GIS as a new paradigm for understanding the city, Long suggests the inability for the Nully map to make sense of the contemporary city. The traditional dichotomies of solid and void, public and private, have been undermined. Instead, post-city urbanism is digital, transactional, and relational, not spatial in a traditional sense. The resulting landscape reifies the network ideology that is representative of our time. This urbanism does not create the density found in the traditional city, but rather strategically distributes itself across vast distances as a network, systems for efficiently moving people and things through the exchange of data. As identified by Vernalis, power has reconfigured itself into network form. Businesses strategically distribute the material manifestations of the corporation across the country in various instantiations. From corporate headquarters, retailers are connected via highway, rail, phone line, and internet to their distribution centers, data centers, production facilities, divisional headquarters, and big box stores. These spatial relationships are expressed materially as idiosyncratic paths in transportation and communication networks, dictated by complex factors like terrain, population densities, political maneuvering, and public funding. A retail transaction is facilitated within the architectural enclosure of the store by assembling overlapping sited materialities with global reach within the same space. In this sense, the store is an intense communication node that facilitates transaction within the network, where retail architecture acts more as a conduit for flows than a container, blurring the lines between infrastructure and architecture. Big box tectonics follow the logic of the market, while signage and branding are layered onto blank, expressionless containers to create the aura and experience around the banal architecture of the warehouse as a packaging machine. So emphasizing the role of architecture in communication like the duck and the decorated shed, the packaging machine instead communicates through the construction of experience, which is an extension of the packaging and branding of products and designed to sell more. In this way, architecture becomes a tool for modulation, creating compelling consumer experiences as a form of control. The grocery store is a specific node within the network of a complex cyborg geography. The following description and representations are an exploration of this manifestation of urbanism through examining one particular retail transaction. There is nothing particularly noteworthy about my purchase of a box of Swiss rolls on January 25th, 2012 at 8:23 p.m. Store number 605 is strategically located on the northern edge of the North Campus of the University of Michigan. Its physical location is determined by the ideal radii for catchment areas relative to the other Kroger stores in Ann Arbor. This location allows the store to effectively serve the local population, while the store's prototype, one of 5 different types, is flexible enough to respond to the unique town and gown dichotomy of its context. At the same time, the store is connected to corporate headquarters in Cincinnati, Ohio, division headquarters in Novi, Michigan, as well as a network of distribution centers of communication and transportation networks. The store is generally no different architecturally than Kroger's distribution or data distribution centers, except for a few finishes added to make the environment more palatable to consumers. The familiar long-span trusses, wide-flange columns, and metal decking create an efficient architectural enclosure, while veneers of brick, vinyl plank flooring, VCT, and signage dress up the warehouse. Immediately upon entry into the store, customers have to pass through a large open space with upgraded finishes. This flexible area contains a Starbucks as well as a series of smaller kiosks, each containing a specialty item like cheese or sushi. This mix of product offerings was strategically determined through predictive analytics to respond to local demographic tastes and modifying the Kroger's generic prototype. So this modification clearly represents the values and preferences of the consumer groups that comprise the 48105 zip code. McKee Foods is based in Collegedale, Tennessee, and it manufactures Swiss rolls in Stuart Strauss, Virginia, which are then collected in Kroger's consolidation centers and shipped to the local store. To purchase the Swiss rolls, the cashier swipes the barcode across the optical scanner in the checkout line, instantly setting into motion a series of processes. Kroger's database registers that a box of Swiss rolls has been purchased, allowing managers and suppliers to monitor the 60,000 product inventory of store number 605. My body is spatially extended as the cashier then scans the UPC on my Kroger Plus card, a loyalty card, and the unique 12-digit identifier then links my identity to the recently liberated box of Swiss rolls. As an individual, I now occupy Kroger and data mining firm dunnhumby USA, their databases in Columbus, Ohio. In this transaction, my physical body is spatially extended further through swiping my credit card. And my data in dialogue with other data protocols allows me to complete a payment. The scale of this transaction is striking. In the 3 seconds that it took to approve my credit card and complete the sale, the data about my purchases travels almost 4,000 miles. Later that day, the settling process will begin a different journey of over 3 days until the process is applied to my account. This data is as much a part of me as the atoms that compose my physical body, yet at the time of the transaction, I was completely unaware of the agility of my extended body. dunnhumby USA, in conjunction with the Kroger Company, has created Mass Intimacy, a proprietary approach toward predictive analytics that strives to deliver the personal connection of a mom-and-pop store while passing along the savings and efficiency of a global big-box retailer. dunnhumby USA gives scores in 50 different categories to Swiss rolls. This finer grain of individual data allows the product to feed into 7 distinct customer segments. And I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to just wrap up. These descriptions and representations of a vast yet highly specific datascape reveal relationships between forces and forms in a type of forensic architecture. This encounter with the Kroger Company is a moment in which the cyborg geography of exchange is made visible. The images are a constellation that begin to map a geography of a post-city urbanism that is both physical and data through interactions between institutions, people, and material objects. By examining a familiar situation with a high degree of specificity, we can see more clearly how systems of surveillance, urbanism, and predictive analytics are embedded in the everyday. The drawings attempt to reveal these immaterial qualities and render them as an unseen spatial territory that is as real as the physical spaces we encounter. Elements of architecture like site selection, finishes, and program are specific manifestations of this cyborg geography instantiated in the sited materiality of the grocery store. The store serves as a conduit for flows of both people and objects, in both a physical and a data sense, in creating a building that is both architecture and infrastructure. The grocery store is one instance within the familiar contemporary post-city landscape resulting from processes of urbanism that are remaking our natural and human environment. By first rendering this imperceptible yet ubiquitous urbanism, we may begin to speculate how it can be a territory for further design exploration. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present here at the MediaCities conference. First of all, to introduce myself, my name is Achilleas Psyllidis. I'm a PhD candidate at the Wave Factory and Hyperbody research groups of the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands, and I'm also educated as an architect. So what I would like to talk about today relates mostly to my ongoing PhD research, and we'll elaborate with an associative relation between the physical urban space, the digital technologies, and of course the inhabitants of the space. So the main question, and at the same time the challenge that I'm elaborating with, is how we can move beyond mobile applications, dedicated website platforms, or crowdsourced mapping tools that most of the times use data in a way of an overlaid ontology that is quite separated from the urban fabric, from actually the environment that the data were derived from, towards interfaces that actually use the data as mutually constituting elements with a built environment. So what I would like to elaborate with is to deploy a methodological framework for a system that's actually perceived as an interface that can be used as a platform for both citizens and municipal planning authorities. So I will try to deploy this not only by showing you the framework, but at the end also presenting you how we try to apply this framework in the context of an intensive one-week workshop that was finished on the previous week at the TU Delft, and it was called Real-Time City, and it was organized by myself in collaboration with Pascal Meyer. So prior to introducing you to the framework, allow me to show you the motivation behind it. So this short animation, which was not supposed to look like this, but it shows how the urban population, okay, never mind, how the urban population actually evolved during the last decades of the 20th century as we moved on the first decade of the 21st century. And these are the predictions that, according to the United Nations, by 2050 we will reach more than 70% of the world population being at an urban state. Currently, we have exceeded more than half of the world's population living in cities. These diagrams actually show not only that our cities are increasing in terms of number and size, they also show that cities is where we choose to live mostly. And this is on the one hand, let's give it this one, and on the other hand, we are facing on the last years a transition in most of the Western and many of the non-Western societies, a transition from an economy which was industrially based towards an economy which is based mostly on digital information and services. So what are the repercussions of this transition? Well, we can obviously see them in terms of the visible urban patterns of the productivity streams. For example, here is a picture of Manchester. This is the first industrial city, called also Cottonopolis, where we could realize and obviously see the tracks, the urban activities of the production of smoke coming out of these protruding chimneys all over the urban fabric. But nowadays, as we move on, these kind of patterns start to be more and more invisible. But they seem to have a strong impact, not so much on the way that the urban layout is actually deployed, because the layout of the city doesn't appear to be very different from the ones of the industrial cities, but they do have a strong impact on the way that we experience the urban environment. And this might be a very good example. This is an official poster of the Dutch government. It will soon be, it will soon appear in many public buildings in the Netherlands, and it says, warning, in case of fire, please evacuate the office before posting it on social media. So you realize that the impact is actually strong in the way we experience it, but how can we use this data as mutually constituting elements that can form also the layout of our urban public space? So as you realize, because our cities do not only comprise infrastructure, but most of all people that actually use this infrastructure, while trying to deploy this framework for these urban systems, we were in search of a specific tool that might help us. So we came up with the PACT design framework. This is a framework which is widely used in the field of interaction design, and PACT is an acronym for People, Activities, Contexts, and Technologies. And the importance of this one is that it's not only user-centric, since it has people in its center, but it creates a nice synergy between these four components, that people undertake activities within certain contexts by using technologies. And so the activities made by the people within this context actually provide the requirements for the technologies that we can propose. And in turn, these new technologies that emerge provide new affordances and opportunities for new activities to emerge, and so on and so forth in this feedback loop. So what is important to keep from this one is, on the one hand, that it's user-centric, and on the other hand is this cyclic nature of interactivity that it introduces. So while trying to see the methodological framework of the proposed system, and don't be scared about this, I have a zoomed-in picture. We said that it is important to have a system that will have a physical presence. It will be embedded within the urban fabric so that it kind of mutually recreates the urban environment the way that the built components do nowadays. So we set information as equal to the built environment. And the function of these systems is actually triple. On the one hand, it senses data, which is something very familiar to all of us, then visualizes these data and analyzes it. But the importance of the system is it actually gets this data back to the urban fabric in terms of public interfaces. And also another importance of these systems is that they do not measure data in terms of individual parameters as we do nowadays, for example, with transport companies, that they only measure transport data, for example, or meteorological data of urban quality, but they are trying to make this relational model, for example, between people and air quality, people and traffic and air quality, and so on. And to keep it a little bit more clear, it actually gives the opportunity to both citizens and municipal planning authorities to interact with the system, and according to the nature of the data that it measures, the two interacting parties that are involved elaborate with different kind of urban patterns. So, for example, the municipal planning authorities might get involved in occupancy levels and measuring mobility patterns so that they can set some system boundaries in order to provide to the citizens an expandable library where they can actually choose and try to adapt in terms of behavioral adaptation or infrastructural adaptation according to the system boundaries provided by the municipal authorities. And these customization alternatives provided by the citizens turn back to the system, and then we get always this feedback loop between the two involved parties. So allow me to show you in brief how we try to deploy this framework in a workshop that it was held, as you see, almost the previous week at the Technical University of Delft. It was called the Real-Time City as an Ambient Interface, and we used as a case study site the city of Rotterdam, which, of course, it's a Western city, but it has two distinguishing characteristics. It comprises of 173 different nationalities currently inhabiting it, and, of course, it's ground-up reconstruction after its sheer devastation during World War II. So I'll try to present to you very briefly just two of the projects that were developed during this workshop. The first one, called Urban Sound Clouds, actually was interested in seeing how we can make, our urban space more enjoyable and more livable in order to tackle the everyday routine. So what they proposed was actually embedding devices with proximity sensors and Wi-Fi connectors within existing urban furniture, and then these will retrieve within a certain radius the sounds, the songs that one might be listening in his or her headphones, for example, and then retrieve the sound and then upload it to a network within the neighborhood, which was called the Neighborhood Sound Cloud. And this sound cloud will actually form the emotional map of the neighborhood. And in this way, we'll try to enhance and to give some program to the public space and be more livable, more enjoyable. So it appears that some things are missing, which I don't know why, but no worries. This shows how loud are they, but I think I'll move forward. And of course, keep in mind that this had different intervals, and music didn't always play it. It depended on the different time schedules and in the course of the day. And the other one, the plein in Dutch is the square, so it's kind of the play square. This was used in the Schaberplein in Rotterdam, which is the theater square. And it has these distinguishing four light cranes that were mostly, they were supposed to be interactive by the last intervention made by West 8, but they seem to be all the other thing than interactive. They try to propose, they try to engage people to get into the square, because nowadays most of the people just move through the periphery of the square. So they try to introduce some systems that they will be deployed throughout the day, and that will give the opportunity, for example, via proximity sensors, touch screens, and different kinds of actuators, that they are embedded within the existing infrastructure, which are these ventilation boxes and the light cranes I was talking about, in order to project different activities that will engage people into interacting with the square. So, for example, there could be information from all around the public space of the square, as well as, for example, projecting a piano where notes will be reproduced and shown on the facade of the theater, or maybe some random gizmos that will actually sense your presence and will follow you in order to engage you with interacting with the square. So, but of course, there were many solutions that it's impossible to present to you right now. It's just, you can have an overview of this, and if you're interested, there is also this blog spot that was made for this workshop. So what we wanted to do is actually see all the possibilities, or the possibilities that we can have in order to tackle these emerging problems, and perhaps provide a more effective and sustainable solutions towards the city of the 21st century. So thank you so much for your attention.
Hi. I am Paolo Cirio, artist originally from Italy, today based in New York, and a fellow artist in I-Beam in New York. And I am here to present this project that is actually also part of the exhibition that will open tomorrow evening, and also is an intervention around the city. And actually this afternoon was like installing this Ghost. The project is actually called Street Ghost, and is basically simply printing people that they find in them the exact spot where they are, they were in the street. So this video should explain what is about this project.
From Mashable, I'm Lauren Gorse. Google's Street View feature, which aims to capture city streets and landmarks, sometimes captures you. You've probably seen it online, the blurred faces on the sidewalk or outside the grocery store. But now you can see some of the same figures offline. Street artist Paolo Cirio is copying and literally pasting life-sized images of people captured by Google on streets in the exact spots you'd find them online. He calls the project Street Ghosts, a fitting name because you'd never be able to match the blurry face. Cirio is putting posters up in London, Berlin, and New York City, but he's not doing it as a kind of Where's Waldo. Instead, he's trying to make a statement about the publication of the images. He writes, "As the publicly accessible pictures of individuals taken without their permission, I took the pictures of individuals without Google's permission and posted them on public walls." Now, whether his poster prints make the political statement he's hoping for is really up to you, but Street View has grabbed plenty of headlines over privacy issues. You may remember that man in France who sued Google over an image captured of him peeing in his front yard. Thankfully, Cirio has not taken his project to France yet. For Mashable, I'm Lauren Gorse.
So this was one of the first reaction from the media, but was much wider. Actually, there are many review of this project on several type of medias, from well, tech blog for sure, but also newspaper more or less around the world, and photography magazine, architecture magazine too, and design, and so on, even fashion, and of course street art. So the reaction was quite big and intense all over the world, and quite surprising because after all they were just like 25 posters in 3 cities, so it wasn't like really about the quantity. It was just like playing out with the perception of our personal information. So this project is much about privacy, but also because this festival talks more about the value of the city. This project is also actually how big corporations like Google, a monopoly of information power, basically just harvest any value that you can find, that they can find in the city, and they sell us back this information that normally should be considered public. So they basically monopolize public information, and for public information I mean anything that you can see around by even walking in the city. So I will read some theoretical statements that I wrote for this project. And before of that, maybe I show you something that I did just this afternoon when you were here, actually. And these are the first poster that I installed in Buffalo, and this is actually outside of this building. It's just like, in this case, it's not weight pasted, it's like just tape, double tape, but it probably will stay for a few days. And this was really like from far away, so it doesn't have much details. This one is like on Allen Street, and it's downtown. You will probably see, in this case, really transparent, it really seems a ghost. And in other case, here it's really blurred too. And they are just basically screenshot, and I really work little with Photoshop to bring up some light. These are also kind of cool on a bookstore in downtown. I don't have here the screenshot, but on the website is everything documented through the Google Map, and then I post this picture of the documentation on Google+. So eventually people can tag this person and find their real profile. Oh, this is the first time that I meet a victim. So this is actually the guy, and this like is where this guy works basically, and this is the truck, and it's amazing because on Google Street View it's actually the same disposition of car and the person. So maybe I just read quickly some statement. The collection of data that Google and similar corporations have become the material of everyday life, yet their sources is personal information of private individual. By remixing and reusing this material, I artistically explore the boundaries of ownership and exposure of this publicly displayed, privately held information about our personal lives. In this case, the artwork becomes a performance, recontextualizing not only data, but also conflict. It's a performance on the battlefield, playing out war between public and private interest for winning control over our intimacy and habits, which can change permanently depending on the victor. Who has more straight in this war, the artist, the firm, the legislator, the public concern, or the technology? The configuration of informational power provokes engagement between those social agents who are recruited through simple visual exposure. Ghostly human bodies appears as casualties of the infowar in the city, a transitory record of collateral damage from the battle between corporation, government, civilians, and algorithms. Some of this battle has played out in the court. For instance, Swiss and German government has placed legal restriction on Google, claiming that capturing people on street in this way violate their privacy. Google rejoined with the accuracy of this facial blurring algorithm though it doesn't always work, but even if it does, this is hypocrisy. The rest of their body, their hair, their clothes are more than enough to identify them, especially for someone that's really interested in their private lives. Google didn't ask permission to appropriate image of all the world, town, and cities, nor did it pay anything to do so. It sell ads against this public and private content, and then resell the information collected to the same advertiser, making billions that are even taxed. It's a sort of exploitation by a giant social parasite that resell us what was collectively created by people, activity, and money. The public display of this biopolitical surplus from Google value harvesting campaign appropriates their aesthetic and political value as opposed to the commercial. Google appropriates the social labor we perform by constituting the public, simply by investing the city with social meaning. We unintentionally provide value for Google to capture. The street art intervenes by confronting the public with the aesthetic qualities of this data they didn't even know they were alienating, and force them to reckon with the possibility of their own image appearing as ghostly slave trapped in a digital world forever. There is also like this theory that is much more about privacy, because this is not the only work that I did by pushing these boundaries. So face-to-Facebook is actually much more popular and persecuting us a little bit less, but it's interesting too. And it's about a passive participation in art, in the art history, I would say, and how I do sculptural performance, informational power, performance made by informational bodies. So this is like more art history, but I just show you what I feel connected to. So living sculpture, social sculpture of Joseph Beuys. And this is like something that really remind me well the projects that I did, like as sociological exhibition or social realism, like this is like really old artwork, performance artwork. This is like another one that also remind me my works. And the question of morality of my works and ethics of my works is also like another one that is like an act of social sadness made explicit, and the social act of manipulation which is real society happen every day. And so, after all, my works are just like a social experiment with rich ready-made material that I found online, and pushing the boundaries to try the extension of current social contexts not visible in daily rush. And then what is moral and what is ethic, and surely about the shifting cultural perception regarding privacy and public space.
Not only revolutionize the way that the goods are kind of carried around, but it will bring us also into this kind of structure of data management flows, whatever. And on the other hand, we also need interfaces like the ones that we introduced and showed in Arcus, where we get those information back into physical space. I know the question is really difficult, but I'm always interested in how actually we will make people aware of those complex flows of information, and how will the interfaces actually look in a time when we will have the Internet of Things, which seems not to be too far away. I can just ask that question to the whole audience. I don't know whether somebody wants to react.
If I could start out. I mean, I think what's interesting about the other presentations is that there is a sense of reintroducing that data and making it visible or interactive in a way that I think in the retail transaction it's intentionally made opaque so that you don't know what's going on. And I feel like a lot of times when I'm presenting this work, it often falls into discussions of privacy. And by doing the drawings, I'm attempting to work on that privacy issue by illustrating something that's going on that we can't yet see. And so I like the way that these other works are starting to look at ways that we can start to make that more visual, or that we understand that at the interface level, how we start to see those systems.
I would love to say that it's not only about making it visible, but making it tangible as well. because this is another challenge. Because for the Internet of Things, as you mentioned, well, I think that the next step, as said by Cisco, is the Internet of Everything. So the Internet of Things is here right now. So maybe we need to face in the very near future the Internet of Everything. So we do not know what this reality will be or why will we need such a reality, what would it be. But I think that the importance of these interfaces is actually to give back the information to people by not only showing them visualizations, but giving them the opportunity to interact, to give their opinions, and then of course, maybe something that I also forgot to mention in my presentation, maybe not at all bottom-up or top-down procedure, but actually it might be more important to see this interlocking between these designed by experts and the design that comes out of the citizens. So I think that on the one hand, the challenge is making these interfaces more tangible in terms that they have a physical presence within our urban environments, and of course, and for more, to give people the opportunity to give back their information so that they can be visualized also by other authorities.
If I can follow up on that, I also think that it's that exactly that, like we were saying, Keith, also that we make it the invisible visible, which is also the whole space thing, you know. It's something that acts upon us and that we should be able to act upon. So it's about also creating different kinds of interfaces that make that palpable in a sense, so we can actually do stuff with it and bring things into the city. So an artistic project like yours is also making experientializable that which we do not really experience, right? The take of the pictures by Google, stuff like that, so to actually re-enter it into the way that we can actually act upon the things that we need in the city.
But then I think why we've been trying to push this kind of question of relations instead of connections, and why we talked about beyond the network, because this can become a very empty and shallow paradigm to say everything is connected. What does it mean? I mean, it's a completely depoliticized instrumentalization of an idea, like, I don't know, swarm theories that look beautiful and no one really knows what's actually going on. So the question of the transitions from the immaterial to the material is really what is interesting in these kind of processes of how to design or interact with them, how to create situations and compositions on an aesthetic level that we're interested in this project and you're basically interested in, but also of what are the immediate effects of these kind of things. So it's not just I'm wondering, what are actually the immediate effects if this all data is mined, if the mappings take place, if everything is traced, and so how is this becoming tangible, as Jonas says, so that things are out not in place next to each other on a shelf because people have similar kind of shopping patterns, and therefore the range of surprise in your shopping experience, if it's already a great, not such a great thing anyway, the shopping experience, but the narrowing that comes up. But also in your paper, I found what is interesting is that despite the bottom-up and top-down, I was wondering, what does it mean to engage people, and what does the paradigm of participation in these processes mean, and how this is just another kind of extraction of surplus on the user, the citizen that is now joyfully interacting.
It's not only engaging, sir.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a very critical stance. You can always say it's enhancing, of course.
No, it's not only about engaging, it is how you can keep people actually engaged. But I think that the most important question that we need to ask for ourselves when we try to design some of these interfaces is actually make an interesting question that we want to find an answer and we want to tell a story about with this interface actually. Because currently all these kind of visualizations that we have do not actually tell a story by themselves. They're only bits and pieces of a conversation, but they do not actually frame a conversation by itself. So
then you do a massive shift of the paradigm. So that then with the narrative level, I think
we need to move beyond this kind of thing.
shortly like to interrupt here because it's going to be a very interesting panel discussion, but that's not what we're supposed to do. So obviously, actually, I got the point of the session, I imagine. But I would like to open maybe one of the questions to the audience. Catherine?
And I think this brings us back to the whole, although these projects are in that context, I think this brings us back to the possibly thinking around this, what's happening in smart cities, big data, because that's the way that that's where the funding's going, that's where the money is, that's where all the talk is. And the ground, the data is not bottom up, it's all top down, actually. I was quite curious actually with Paolo, with the guy who was in Street View, you posted who you found, what happened when you met him and he knew about your project?
Well, I asked permission before, so it was just, just when there was a job, it wasn't like surprised or shocked. But I don't know, I never had like a direct conversation with someone that found themselves suddenly in front of their house in the morning, so I don't really know. But the interesting reaction was from the crowd. It's was much more like the crowd on the internet, how people reacted. If you read the comments on the newspaper article, they're really incredible. Like they were just like, oh, why you're doing that? And that is like fucked up and blah blah blah. When actually all these people is already like online, so those posters stay up for just a few days, So, and that's like really a shifting notion of privacy and how we perceive that. If I do this project in next 5 years, probably not producing the same reaction, I find. And how people still are so attached to the physical space, although they navigate online all the time and they leave all this information on these platforms, and that's why we still don't know how to deal with that. So it's like a process. Yeah. The only issue for me is that it's like these big companies are monopolizing this information, and also the technology is really centralized. So big data is something that will increase in the next years for sure, but the problem today is that it's really monopolized by just a few companies. Instead, we should use more different architecture in terms of peer-to-peer or something else that doesn't happen because this monopoly is not just about information, but they also economically monopolize the market. So they hire the people, they want the best people, and they tell them what to develop. That, of course, breeds their business. So because of that, there is not really progress, technologically speaking, you can find sometimes.
So we can have a coffee break, I guess, Jordan?
Yeah.